Okay, hello again, folks. Like I said, my name's Jamie. I work for Keep Scotland Beautiful, mainly in the Eco Schools program, but we've got my colleagues with us today, and we're all going to be taking part in some form or another. We've got Josh, we've got Maya, and we've got Guy. So myself, Josh, and Maya will be delivering about 20-minute sections for the workshop today, and Guy is kindly going to be managing the chat in case there's any questions or any technical difficulties. But hopefully, fingers crossed, like I said, everything should go fine. So just for any schools who have just joined, could you please write the name of your school and whether it's an eco committee or a class, and where you're coming from today into the chat? That would be great. Thank you. And that's what we'll be using for your attendance, really, so that we can register you. Like I said, we will be doing about 20-minute sections each, and we're going to be looking at fast fashion. We're going to be looking at how we use our energy and how we can manage our food and our food waste. So we've got quite a variety of different topics to show you. Looking forward, the main reason that we're doing all this is so that we can essentially get started on different actions that can have a really positive impact either as an individual or as a school or as a group. Could be just your eco committee or as your family. So hopefully from the three topics that we look at today, you'll come out of this seeing that there's so many different things that you can do, like I said, as an individual or as a group. And it's your choice based on what we talk about today, what you think you will be able to accomplish or what you want to strive for in the future. But baby steps for the difficult things, but there's a lot of things that we can start right now today that can have a really big and positive impact on our planet. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to hand you over to Maya. I almost got that wrong. Maya's going to be talking first about fast fashion. So on you go, Maya.
Yep, that's fine. I'm just uploading my PowerPoint now, so just give it a few seconds, and then I'll skip to the slide that I meant to be showing you. But yeah, this first session or section is about fast fashion. So we're going to be looking at what fast fashion is, what the effects of it are, how it links to climate change, because sometimes that can be a bit unclear. We know that it's mentioned in connection with climate change, but it's not always clear what the connection is. And then how we can take positive action towards reducing the problem. So everything I just said should show up on the slide just now. There we go. So all the things I've just talked about. And it's also good to bear in mind, whether you've watched the video before this session or whether you watch it afterwards, and it will be in the notes when you receive the PowerPoint, how we as individuals, so one person, groups, so it could be friendship groups, it could be a community, and societies, so that could be countries or international communities. How do we all take part in the fashion industry? And therefore, how can we change it? So by tracking it back to the source's problem, we have a much better chance of actually taking action that's meaningful, long-term, and sustainable, which is another word that we hear often, especially relating to fast fashion. So the first question we have, it's a poll that should show up on your screen. If it doesn't, the question will be posted into the chat. The first question is just, what is fast fashion? So there's three different options. You should see it come up on your screen in a minute. The first option is the habit of buying clothes as quickly as possible. The second option is creating and selling clothes as quickly and as cheaply as possible. And the third option is fashion trends that change quickly. Sometimes, and this is deliberate, it's not always obvious what fast fashion means. And to be honest, it's plausible that it could be any of those things, because it is kind of a cryptic title. There is a right answer. I'll tell you what it is once everyone's had a go. As I say, if you can't see the poll, the question will be posted in the chat just now. and you'll be able to have a look over it. You can post your answers in the chat because there's not loads of us here anyway. So I'll just give about just another minute for everyone to put their answers in. So we've got C coming up, number 3. Yeah, C or number 3 is fine. Any other answers? Quite a few people saying C. They think it's fashion trends that change quickly. As I say, it's understandable if you think that it's any of those options, because it isn't that self-explanatory. So quite a few people think B, creating and selling clothes as quickly and as cheaply as possible. It's kind of a 75-25% split at the moment. And quite a few people saying 2. That's great. Okay, thank you everyone. I think that's mostly everyone who's participated. It takes a few seconds to come up on my screen. The answer is the second option. So creating and selling clothes as quickly and as cheaply as possible. But the other 2 do feed into that. So we are very used now to buying clothes quickly. So you don't even have to go to the shop anymore. You can just order it online. You don't even have to leave your house because it will be delivered there. And we're used to fashion trends changing quickly as well. And that's something that a lot of these retailers that participate in this fast fashion kind of model rely upon. So they rely upon people wanting to have the latest fashions, wanting to buy them cheaply and quickly as well. But as the video talks about, so you, as I say, you can watch it after this session, or you might have watched it previously. These rates of making clothes quickly and cheaply just aren't sustainable. It's not going to be able to go on for a long time, and it is taking a big toll on our environment, as you can see from that picture there. That's just one tiny bit of a huge dump of clothes. And it is related to climate change as well, because of the different greenhouse gases associated with the fashion industry. This slide, if you can't see it on a massive screen, if you minimize the chat, and then I think if you click the 3 dots and click full screen, you should be able to see it bigger. But it's a slide that you can come back to afterwards and revisit, because it has a lot of different and interesting facts relating to the different greenhouse gases that the fast fashion industry relates to. So for example, it says there nitrous oxide, a byproduct of the production of nylon, contributes 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And then when it comes to global carbon emissions, the clothing industry is second only to the oil industry, which is huge when you think about it. And the impact of 1 kilogram of nitrous oxide is equal to almost 600 times the same amount of carbon dioxide. And it's really interesting because the fashion industry, its impact doesn't just end with the buying of the clothes. It also relates to the waste, and Jamie will be talking a little bit about this later on as well, how it's not always just buying the product that causes and finances the problem, it's also the way in which it's disposed. So the statistic there said in 2010, 234 tons of textiles went into landfills in Hong Kong alone, and this is equivalent to the weight of 212 great white sharks. It's an interesting statistic to use in terms of sharks, but I suppose it gives you an insight into, because a great white shark is huge and very heavy, how many tons, and this was just in one place alone, not even a country. So that's a really important thing to consider. And a lot of us, and it might even just be because of the culture of this country and what we're told to do when clothes are finished with, we'll just put it in the bin. And that isn't really what we're aiming for here. What would be even better is if we could repair the clothes, or maybe even take them to clothes banks where they can be used again. There are some solutions on this slide as well. I won't go through it in huge detail because it's something you can look back on. But you can see that, for example, with animal clothing, one of the benefits is that it's warm, but one of the drawbacks is that a lot of the time it's unethical. So it's about navigating and looking at the solutions, whether they're actually realistic, whether they are as ethical as they seem, and also whether they'll work for you. So there's no point pledging to something or to do something to take action against fast fashion, but actually if it's not going to work for you and if it's not realistic, it's not going to work long term, and by definition it won't be sustainable. So just a case study here then, something that most of us have, and another question as well, which is will come up as a poll. So on average, how many litres of water do you think it takes to make just one pair of jeans? And just as guidance as well, 1,000 litres is the size of one of those industrial waste bins or dumpsters. And 1,000 litres is also enough for one person per year. So the different options on the poll are 1,000, 3,000, 5,000 and 7,000 litres. Again, the question will be posted into the chat as well if you can't see the poll, and then you'll be able to answer it in either of those ways. So what do you think? I'll just give it a minute for everyone to discuss in their classes, put their answers into the poll or into the chat, whichever. We've got a 50-50 split at the moment between 5,000 and 7,000. Quite a few people saying 3,000. So now more people saying 7. But in the chat we've got quite a few 5,000s. I mean, either way, with any of those options, whether it's 1, 3, 5 or 7,000, it's a lot. And that's just one pair of jeans. And as I say, jeans are often something that we have at least one pair of. So it's quite an interesting statistic, to think about. So I think we have most answers there. Quite a few people are on the right track. I'd love to say it was less, but it's not. It is 7,000 litres. So if you imagine 7 of those industrial waste bins being like full of water being used to make one pair of jeans. So from that, you could then think about how many pairs of jeans do you own? What about the amount in your class or your whole school? And then I suppose it snowballs. You could think about even, communities, and then as a country, it would be quite interesting to know, thinking about how that adds up. So a huge use of resources to make one item of clothing. And that's something that is normalised now in the fast fashion industry and something which we are hoping to move away from. A lot of the time as well with clothes, they're made from things like polyester, which is very cheap to make, but it doesn't degrade very well. So it could take years and years and years for it to break down. And it ends up a lot of the time in dumps, like the one you saw on the title slide. So what would be great is if the clothes never ended up there in the first place. If we had more of it reuse kind of economy or system, or even just thinking about, do I need another pair of jeans if I already have 5, for example, and just having a think about those things. So moving on to the more positive things, how to reduce your fashion footprint. And in the later slides, you'll find a few more further learning activities. You'll see that there is a fast fashion footprint calculator, and it's only 8 questions, and it gives you a sort of personalised solution table of things that you could do. So with these ones, you can see that the thing that would save the most on greenhouse gas emissions is buying mostly second-hand clothes. After that, it would be air drying clothes. Then we'd have shopping mostly sustainable brands as well. Washing clothes on colder temperatures, choosing mostly standard shipping, and then we also have repairing one garment per season, skipping dry cleaning as well, and then renting for special occasions. And some of these things are already being done and they're gaining more popularity. So, for example, buying mostly secondhand clothes through different apps like Depop or Vinted. Also, sustainable brands or brands that are trying to be sustainable. And then also renting is becoming more and more popular for special occasions. So having an outfit for a couple of days and then returning it. And again, that can be reused as well. So it's that concept of not chucking away things once we're done with them, and also just considering whether we need them in the first place and where we're buying them from. That is one of the key things with the whole fast fashion issue. In one of the later slides that you'll find when you get the PowerPoint, there is a website, a link to a website called Good On You, and they have a directory, which is really, really helpful. And you can type in the name of most stores, whether they're online or physical stores, and it will tell you what rating they have based on lots of different things. So it could be how much they pay their workers, animal welfare, their commitment to sustainable materials. So, for example, Marks and Spencer have quite a good rating, and then Primark has the worst rating, and quite a few other stores that we see it very often. So H&M, Topshop when it was still there, that kind of thing. And it's very helpful if you're actually standing in front of the shop wondering if you should go in, just typing the name in and seeing, and knowing exactly what you're buying is really, really helpful. Sometimes we don't always want to know. It's a lot easier not to. But it's really, really interesting. And then it means that you can give your custom to somewhere that does produce ethical and sustainable clothes. And it's a good thing to know in general. So as I was just saying, doing research into the different products you buy is helpful, because it doesn't just point out the problem and say, no, you can't buy that, and that's the end of it. Most of these sites that I've referred you to will present you with different solutions. So you could buy the product alternatively, in an alternative way, or you could just buy a different product. And what's really important, and it's quite easy just to remember, is that mantra: less, differently, or not at all. So thinking about, shall I buy that stuff less? Shall I buy it in a different way? Or do I even need to buy it at all? Here's an example that things we all run into, things that issues I've run into myself. So I buy lots of clothes from fast fashion stores like Primark. A lot of the time that's because they are cheap, and that is part of their, I suppose, appeal. Here are different options that are available to me. So stop buying them, buy them less, buy whatever I want from a more ethical retailer or sustainable retailer, buy second-hand clothes or make my own clothes. And here's a solution that would work for me, for real as well. So I'm not good at sewing or making things, but I do have lots of different charity shops near me. And I can and have downloaded a second-hand or vintage app like Depop or Vinted, and I can buy my clothes those ways. It's worth bearing in mind not to just buy clothes and then think I'll just sell them second-hand, and using it just as a backup option if you're selling them as well as buying them, because that kind of perpetuates the problem. But it is a really good way of buying clothes and not contributing so much to the fast fashion problem. And there is sometimes stigma around secondhand clothes, but when you actually think about it, a lot of us do it without realizing. If we borrow clothes from a friend, if we end up with clothes from an older sibling or older relative, and most of us have done it where we've bought something, tried it on and thought, actually, no, I don't like that anymore, or it doesn't suit me. So why not sell it on to someone else? The last thing I just want to say before I finish and hand over to Josh is you might have seen in the news today, and this is quite an interesting step and something to bear in mind, especially related to the problem I've just presented you with, is that Primark is pledging to be more sustainable. So it's pledging to provide a better wage for the people who make their clothes, to make them more recyclable, and also to keep the cost down. So they're saying that they're going to provide better clothes for the same price. So it might not always be that the buying the clothes and the consumer is the problem. It could be the retailer, and it's good that they're taking these steps. But it'll be very interesting for us all to just keep an eye on it and see how successful they are with that pledge. Because a lot of companies will say that they're carbon neutral or they'll say they're sustainable, but it's always good to do that research and just to see, are they really? And if they're not, do you want to give them your custom? So thank you very much for listening. I'm going to pass you on to Josh now, who's going to talk to you about energy.
Great, thank you so much, Maya. So just bear with me 1 second whilst I share my screen with you all. Yeah, so just as Maya said, I'm here today to talk to you about energy, and I'll be going into that in a bit more detail in a second. It's good to see so many of you with us, and I recognise some familiar names from people who either myself or Maya have delivered climate-ready classrooms to. My PowerPoint is just taking a few moments to load up. I'm not sure if the internet is great my end today. But what we're going to be thinking about and talking about today is energy. So we're firstly going to be thinking about where that energy comes from. So we'll be thinking about electricity mainly. We'll then be moving on to thinking about what we can do with our phone usage to make that a bit more sustainable and maybe reduce the carbon footprint associated with our phones. And then we'll finally be thinking about how we can save energy in school. It's still taking a while to load, which is being very frustrating. So whilst I'm waiting for that to load, I'm just going to share a poll with you, which you can have a go at. And this is asking you the question, when you wake up in the morning, how many different things do you do which use energy? Now my polls have decided to pack up as well. It's obviously it's not a very good day for me today.
Maya, is Josh gone on your end as well?
Yeah, so I think Josh is frozen, but I'm just going to share the PowerPoint with you now, so just bear with us.
No
You should
worries.
see the poll there.
Yeah, as you can see, folks, the poll's on the screen. So what Josh was in the middle of asking was, how many electrical items do you think you use every morning? So we've got a few options in front of you. I'm not going to give you any examples because I feel like that'll give away the answers. But it'll be interesting to see what everybody thinks. So have we got, when you wake up and in the morning before you go to school or it's the weekend, do you use 0 devices or do you use 0 electrical items, 1 to 5, 6 to 10, or more than 11? And I've input my answer because even though it's a bit embarrassing. Josh, you're alive.
Yes, I am alive. Can you hear me? I'm just saying that
Yes.
because
Yeah.
my Teams is being very strange at the moment.
I'm just finding your slide. There we go. Right. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
I'll turn off
Okay,
just now
great.
and be on standby.
I'll take control if that's okay. Grand. Have you shared the poll, Jamie? I heard you talking about that, but I don't know if you did or not.
The poll's been shared, yeah. We've currently got neck and neck between 6 and 10 and 11 plus, with about a third of the vote each, and then just slightly less with 1 to 5, and nobody has said 0, which is not unsurprising, I would say.
Excellent. Thank you so much. How fortunate I am to have such nice colleagues. Yeah, so thank you for doing that. Basically, the reason why I've got you to do this poll is just to make you realise how linked our lives are to energy. And that's mainly in this poll is mainly thinking about electricity, but it's also thinking about fuel such as maybe gas for a boiler to heat up water, or petrol or diesel for a car or maybe a bus. And essentially, from the moment we wake up to when we go to sleep, we have some form of energy being involved in our lives. And in reality, most of that is electricity. And so we need to think about that and be aware of that, and then think about maybe how can we reduce our usage of energy, because often when we are generating energy or using energy or fuel, then there is a carbon footprint attached to that. So I'm just going to start by thinking about, where does our energy generally come from? So in general, in the world, most of the energy or electricity is generated by burning fossil fuels. So things like coal, oil and gas, we dig them up out of the ground and we burn them, and the process of burning them releases carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas, into the atmosphere. And the reason why we burn them is that we can then get that energy and turn it into electricity, which is used for lots of things in our work, our day-to-day lives, and at home. So it's used for all of the electronic devices, so phones, TVs, computers, games consoles. The electricity is also used for all of the appliances that you might find at home, so your lights, things like microwaves. And it's also used for our online presence. So all of our online data, so that could be photos and videos, maybe stored on Instagram. It will be all of the messages on messaging apps like WhatsApp or Facebook. All of our online data is stored in things called data centers, and that all requires electricity to run. So I'm going to talk very briefly about what a data center is, because I think it's important for us to understand what it is when so much of our lives does have an online aspect to it. So this is what a data center currently looks like. Most of the social media data centers, so things like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, most of those data centers are going to be in the United States, in North America, and they will be run using electricity generated in that area. And they require electricity 24/7, and they also require water to help keep them cool 24/7. And you can see that they're basically absolutely massive warehouses where there's loads and loads of stacks of computers which are on all the time, and that is where all of our data to do with those things like Facebook and WhatsApp, that's where all of that data is stored. Now, whilst these data centers are becoming more efficient, which they are, the massive increase in data which they are having to store is quite quickly outpacing those efficiency savings. So it's really important to think about reducing the amount of things that we need to store online. Now, obviously, there are lots of things which are essential and need to be stored online. But when we're thinking maybe about things like videos and photos, which we might be taking quite a lot of and storing quite a lot of online, maybe we can think about reducing the numbers of them. And so this leads me to my next question, which I just want you to have a quick chat in your class about and then stick an answer in the chat. But I want to know from you, how many photos and videos do you think you take in a day or a week on your phone? And this includes taken on an app or like Instagram or on TikTok. So give yourself 30 seconds, have a chat as a class, and then in the chat, tell me how many photos or videos do you think you take on average on either a day or a week? So Maya started us off with about 50. And so we've got two classes coming in, another one saying 50, some saying 200, maybe about 150 per week. Mr. Turner's come in, about 100 per day for students, about 12 for staff. Excellent. And we ran this session yesterday, and we found quite similar numbers as well. Students tended to have much higher numbers than staff would. And what I want you to think about then is, do you actually need to keep all of those photos and videos stored? Because I'm going to guess the answer is no, you probably don't. And whilst it's just on your phone, the reality is that it is being stored on a data center somewhere, and it will have a carbon footprint associated with it. And because of that, if you don't need to store it, then I think it is a great thing to really to remove it from your phone and to not. Oh, my computer's being a bit strange again. If you don't need it, then remove it from your phone, delete it, and then that will mean that you're not storing it online and it won't have a carbon footprint attached to it. Now, like I said, there are some efficiency savings which are happening, and there are some specific ones happening in Scotland, which I think should be championed. And so this slide that I'm showing you now, again, just in the chat function, I would like you to have a guess at where this picture is taken. It is somewhere in Scotland, and also what do you think it is? Now, if you've been taught climate ready classrooms by myself or by Maya, then you might have come across this already. But if you haven't, where do you think this photo has been taken, and what do you think this photo is? It is near a body of water. Yeah, it's just off the coast of somewhere. And we've got a few answers coming in. It is something to do with Microsoft, and it is also just off the coast of Orkney. So this is a data center which has been trialed by Microsoft, which has been stored off the coast of Orkney. So remember, a few slides ago, I showed you that massive warehouse full of computers. That is what a traditional data center looks like, where all of our online information is stored. That needs loads of electricity, loads of water to keep it cool and to keep it running. Microsoft are now trialing data centers which can be stored in these massive pods, which are stored underwater, which are way more efficient. And that means that they then need less electricity to be run, and they also don't need anywhere near as much water to be kept cool. So this is a really exciting thing which is happening off the coast of Scotland, and hopefully we're going to start seeing more data centers like this. But remember my earlier message, all of these efficiency savings are really good, but as we have more and more of our world being moved online and we have more of an online presence, these efficiency savings can be quickly outpaced by that. So it's really worth remembering, trying to reduce the amount of things that you are storing online. Excellent. Another bit of good news. So a few slides ago, I said that most of the energy in the world is generated by burning fossil fuels. That is true. But when we move to Scotland, something that we really should be celebrating is that in 2020, so last year, almost 100% of all of Scotland's electricity, which we used, came from renewable resources. So that's a really good thing to kind of be celebrated in and around Scotland. So we're doing really well in terms of our energy generation. Now, again, remember the data centers, which are storing all of our online information, those are in America, most of them, which has a very different energy generation model. So when we're thinking about our online presence and profile, it's still worth remembering to try and keep it as minimal as possible. But the energy which is coming out of our plugs in Scotland, a high proportion of that, certainly last year, was generated renewably, which is absolutely excellent. Some places like Orkney are actually generating so much renewable energy that they will soon start moving it to mainland Scotland to help support those areas there. Great. Okay, so now we're going to move on to thinking about our phone use and how we can maybe reduce the amount of energy that our phones are consuming and reduce the carbon footprint associated with that. So the first thing that I'd like you to do, again, this can just have a quick chat about it in the class and then stick an answer in the chat. You've got two phone screens there. On the left, you've got screen A, which is very bright, or white, sorry, in the background. And on the right, you have screen B, which has got a dark black background. What I'd like you to tell me is which screen do you think is using more energy? So you just need to have a chat as a class and then write in letter A or B, which screen do you think is using more energy? And we've had lots of people saying letter A, and you're all absolutely bang on. Well done. So this is a really simple switch that you can do after this session to make your phone more energy efficient, to help it last longer, and to help save the battery. Now, obviously, as phones become more efficient over time, the differences between a white screen and a black screen and its energy usage may change, but currently a black dark screen saves way more energy. So if you put your phone into something called dark mode, like you can see here on the screen, then that basically means that your phone's battery is going to be lasting longer. So you'll need fewer charges for your phone, which means that it will have a smaller carbon footprint associated with it. A few other tips of things that you can do with your phone. So the first thing that you can do to save energy usage on your phone is close apps when they are not being used. So if apps are open in the background, even though you might not be using them, they'll still be using some power, and that means that they will be causing your battery to run down on your phone. So if you're not using an app, simply just close it on your phone. The next thing you can also do is lower your screen brightness. That means, again, that your phone is basically going to be using less power and its battery is going to be lasting longer. You can also reduce the amount of video streaming or watching you do on it. This will be one of the most power intensive things that your phone does. So if you do less of it, then you will help preserve the battery. If you are going to watch videos on it, then if you can download them beforehand rather than streaming, then that means that you will be saving energy, and that is way more energy efficient. So if you're watching, say, something on Netflix, then it's much better to download it onto your device first rather than streaming it. If you do have to stream it, then it's more energy efficient, again, to stream over the Wi-Fi rather than to stream over data. Something else you could do, especially if your phone is in an area where there's not much signal, you can put your phone into airplane mode, which basically turns off the signal of your phone, turns off the data, and that is a great way to, again, preserve battery life. Now, I keep talking about preserving battery life, and the reason why I do that is because that is one of the main reasons why people get new phones. It's because their battery of the phone dies and they have to get a new phone. Now, in reality, for phones, the largest carbon footprint that is associated with the phone is actually the manufacturing of it. It's the making of it. So if you can make your battery last longer and therefore make your phone last longer, that would be one of the best things you can do to reduce the carbon footprint associated with that phone. And then if you do need to buy a new phone, then just like Maya was talking about, using apps like Depop or Vinted to get secondhand clothes, you can buy refurbished phones, which are secondhand phones which have been brought up to kind of being like new again, essentially. You can buy them from many different places. There's a website called Back Market, which I've linked to this PowerPoint, which you can go and get a phone from. And again, like I said, the making of the phone often has the highest carbon footprint associated with it of that phone's life. So if you can buy a second-hand phone, that's great from back market. It will mean it will have a much lower carbon footprint. And also, if you can reduce any of these things that I've got on this screen and therefore preserve the battery of your phone, that means your phone is going to last longer and you won't need to buy a new phone as quickly. Just a few more things from me before I hand over to Jamie. When we're thinking about phone use, a task for you to do, and you can do it very quickly now. You're not going onto your phones, you're just predicting things. So again, as a class, just have a 30-second chat and then have a go at answering question A. So how long do you think you spend on your phone on average a day? So I just want the average result for the class. On average per day, how long do you think you spend on your phone? Once you have an answer, stick it in the chat. Okay, so we're getting a kind of mixture of numbers, but we can see that most of the numbers are pretty high. Now, bear in mind that about, I don't know, 30 years ago or so, mobile phones weren't really in general use. Then these are all very, very high numbers. And again, this is going to be causing the battery life to run down, which means that you might need to buy a new phone sooner and therefore increasing the carbon footprint associated with it. So something that you can do later, so after this session, you can then kind of try and predict which 5 apps you use the most, putting them in the list from highest to lowest. And I've just included on this slide how you can actually go about doing that. I'm not going to get you to do it now. I'll let your teachers run through that with you after this session when they get this PowerPoint. But this could be an interesting thing to do to see which apps you use the most, and then maybe you can think about trying to reduce the use of them. And if you've done that, then what a good competition could be to do within either the Eco Committee or within a class. And this could be something that as either a class or an Eco Committee you could take out to the wider school. You could have a competition to see who can reduce their screen time the most in 1 week. And you can get all of this data from your phone, it records it all. But you can then use that to see if you can, which student or class can reduce their phone uses the most in 1 week and therefore reduce the energy consumption and the carbon footprint associated with that phone. Okay, I'm just going to go through one final thing for some tips of saving energy at school, and then I'll hand over to Jamie. So lots of you are either eco committees or you're a class who's obviously interested in trying to save energy at school and reduce the carbon footprint of your school. So I'm just going to give you a few tips of things that you can do to try and achieve this. So the first thing that you could do is form a energy team. So this can be made up from pupils, teachers, canteen staff, janitors, support staff, and you can basically focus on things like lighting, heating, computing, and see what could you do to maybe save energy in these areas. And the first thing that you could do is that you could do an energy audit. So you could go around the school and find out which areas of the school are maybe wasting energy and where could energy be saved. Another thing that you could do, and you could ask your head teacher to help support with this, you could ask for maybe some environmental prefect jobs to be created within the school, which allows students to be a bit more actively involved in the energy kind of usage of the school. Here is a link to something called Less CO2, and it's something that you can look at maybe as a committee or as a class after this session when you get this PowerPoint. But this is essentially some training which allows you to identify areas where you could save energy at your school and therefore reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of your school. Some other very straightforward things which you've probably already heard of. So, turning off lights on computers when they're not in use, maybe if possible, replacing some normal light bulbs with more energy efficient LED light bulbs, or using natural lighting in classrooms where possible. We could also try and make sure that heating and cooling controls are set to the most efficient temperatures, so we don't have some schools which are absolutely roasting and some which are absolutely freezing. Maybe trying to get a much more even, efficient heating system happening over the school could be a possible thing which you could do as well. And one final thing from me. Many schools have vending machines. If those vending machines are selling non-perishable items, so things that don't really go off, then maybe those vending machines could be turned off at the end of the day to save some energy and to reduce the carbon footprint of your school. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you very much for listening. I'm looking forward to hearing about what things you might take forward. And I'm now going to hand over to Jamie, who's going to talk to you about the final aspect of this session.
Thanks very much, Josh. That was great. Thank you, Maya, too. Hopefully by now, folks, you've got some really good ideas or potential ideas for your action plan to go forward, both individually and as a group. I'm just going to share my screen. While I'm doing that, I'm just going to reiterate as well, we're probably going to run about 5 or 10 minutes over. So if you feel like you're not going to be able to hang around for that extra 5 or 10 minutes, don't worry about it. This is being recorded, like I've said, but please just make sure that you've put your name, your school name, sorry, in the chat so that we can send you the link for the recording that you can watch later, or the download link, which we'll get as soon as possible once it's over. Right. So let me just find myself. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. So to finish the day, we're going to be looking at food and waste in combination. Specifically, we're going to be looking at greenhouse gases related to food a little bit and how that impacts on the supply chain as well. And we're going to be looking a little bit on food miles, because I think that's something that's probably been floated around either your geography class or your eco committee, whatever you're calling in from these days, but also just in the news and in society in general. We hear food miles a lot. So we're going to have a look a bit more in detail about the effect that actually has. We're going to then finish off penultimately a little bit on food waste and how that has an impact. Maya's spoken about it already, of the waste that we have in terms of our clothes, and even Josh has spoken about it in terms of the waste we have. Maybe it might not be your typical kind of waste, but the waste that we have of photos that we don't need or videos that we don't use anymore and things like that. We're going to be looking at about that for food as well. And then finally, well, we'll be talking about what I can do as an individual and what we can do as a group. So different ideas that schools are doing right now in Scotland. So first thing we're going to look at is food and its relationship to greenhouse gases in general. So some of you might find this surprising, but for food production and distribution globally, that accounts for about 26% of the greenhouse gases in total, which when I first saw that statistic, I thought, oh my God, that is a huge amount, over a quarter just for food, and to move it around. So what we've done, I've got a little activity here. So of that 26% for just food and its distribution, we've split that up again into percentages. So we've split it into categories more specifically. So we've got livestock and fisheries. So as you can see, that's meat, fish, and seafoods. Supply chain, getting the food from the farms to the shops, wherever it may be in the world. And then we've got land use, and that's usually the converting of land to farmland. And then we have crop production. So that's the growing of grain, fruit and vegetables. So from those four subtopics for the global food production and distribution, what percentage do you think is the highest in terms of greenhouse gas emissions? You can see from the pie chart it's a bit empty, so we need to fill it with those four things. The blue one is 31%, orange is 27%, grey is 24%, and yellow is 18%. So which of those four topics do you think is the blue one, the most? The highest greenhouse gas emitter within food at 31%. You can just say it in the chat which you think is the highest, and it'll just be interesting to see what everyone says. Livestock and fisheries straight away. Okay, got another one. Good. Livestock again. Okay. Okay. Very good. Seems unanimous so far. Okay. I think we'll stop there. I mean, that seems quite unanimous so far. Undecided, but likely livestock or okay, it's a good one. I think when I did it as well, I don't think I can't even remember what I first thought, but I was probably on the same lines as well. Let's think about what's the least. So what's the yellow one? What's 18%? Roughly half of the most. And then we'll have a look at the answers. What do you think is the least out of that list in terms of greenhouse gas emissions? Livestock fisheries, supply chain, land use, or crop production? Crop production, okay. A couple answers there. Crops, crop production, okay. So again, quite unanimous. Maybe there's more discussions going on in class and this is just the majority, but that's fine. Oh, we've got a land use one. Okay, let's have a look then. So you're absolutely right. Livestock and fisheries at 31%, but it's actually the supply chain, which is the lowest greenhouse gas emitter within the sphere of food. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about that just now because we're going to look at it a little later. But followed closely by land use and crop production at 24 and 27%. So hopefully that makes you think in your head, okay, that's interesting. I didn't expect that. Let's keep that in your head and we'll talk about it in just a little bit. So the next one we're going to look at, this is that process that we've just talked about, but almost spread out again. So this is the whole idea of the farm to fork perspective. Okay, so the steps involved in getting your food grown and then onto your plate, we've split up here into 7 categories. Okay, so we've got land use change, we've got farming, we've got the animals to feed that farm, to feed on the farm. We've got the processing of that, then we've got the transport of that, we've got the retail, and then finally the packaging of that product. So all of this for an item of food, whether it's beef, whether it's a stem of broccoli, a head of broccoli, okay? So I'm not going to go into, again, too much detail because I would like to see where you're at, but I've got a question at the bottom and I've also got a poll. Hopefully Josh or Maya can launch it in a second. But I would like you to, oh, that's actually the wrong question, but it's okay. The poll's the right question. The question I wanted to ask is, which of these products at the bottom of your screen do you think has the highest greenhouse gas emissions for production? Okay, so for that whole process that you see in front of you, from land use change to the packaging in the store, which do you think has the highest greenhouse gas emissions? If you can't see the poll or the forms, please just put your answer in the chat. That's not a problem. Okay. Interesting. Very interesting. We've got a good comment from Speyside High School. Not all meat is the same, not all palm oil is produced the same. Yep. This is looking, these answers are based on a global average of just under 40,000 farms. There's a graph on the next slide, which I'll show you, which will go into more detail, but this is in general. So it's taking all, the sustainable farmers potentially, but also the very unsustainable farmers as well. So it looks like we're not far off a split between beef for meat and palm oil. Oh, now we're actually at an exact split. So that's interesting. Okay, some good answers. Right, the next question is, which is on a poll as well. Which do you think has the lowest greenhouse gas emissions? It's the same selection of answers, but which do you think has the lowest? So the poll is just up now. Have a look in your chat. It should be there. It should pop up on your screen. If it doesn't, again, please just put it in the chat. You can just do your answers as a majority in your class. Not everybody has to agree, so don't worry. So it looks like nuts have taken an early lead, followed closely by no one. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Sustainably produced nuts, but location dependent. Absolutely. Yeah. Remember, this is looking at a sort of a global average. So it's not looking at any specific areas of the world. It's kind of taking all the areas and averaging them out. So there is some flaw in the design. But they've done a very good job because they're, like I said, they've got just under 40,000 responses for these answers that we will see soon. So what have we got? We've got 78% roughly for nuts and then 14% for chocolate and chicken. Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, let's have a look. Before I go on to the next slide, I just want you to know that the next slide is color coordinated to the same as the categories that are on your screen right now. So keep a really close eye out for the colors that you notice on the next screen. So we've got green for land use, brown for farming, orange for animal feed, blue for processing, pink for transport, yellow for retail, and grey for packaging. Think straight away when you see this slide, what are the colors that stand out the most, and what are the colors that you don't really see at all? It's quite interesting. Okay. So don't worry too much about the words on the inside of the columns, but hopefully you can see the names of the products on the left-hand side. So if you said beef for meat, you are correct for the highest. If you said nuts for the least, you're absolutely correct as well. Nuts are actually technically carbon negative because they replace croplands that were once forest and they can store carbon in it. But I understand people's perspective because that doesn't convey the sense of if it's a monocrop like palm oil, for example, where you're replacing rainforests with palm oil plantations, which can't support a great amount of biodiversity. That's not really spoken about here because this is mainly looking at carbon emissions. So I understand it from that perspective. So what are the colors that you see the most on the screen? What are the standout colors? Sorry, my chat's gone a bit funny. Oh, there we go. Brown, brown and green, exactly. And if we look back to the previous slide, that refers to land use change and farming methods. Okay, So if we look at them, we can see that in order to have a successful beef herd and things like that, we need to change a lot of land into grazing land for them. And the process for rearing that beef is many, many years compared to vegetables and fruit and things like that, and they require a lot of maintenance. What I just want to point out as well is have a look here at transport. Remember, transport's pink, so that's where we're talking about food miles. But we don't actually see a lot of food miles on this. If we can see here for beef, it's just right at the end here, and it's right just before the yellow on each one. It's very, very minimal. And that's because compared to the actual emissions from land use change and farming, food miles don't actually equate to that much. It might be different when you get down to things like here you can see bananas, even though it's 0.7. Food miles is actually quite a lot because it needs to be transported, but it's still nothing in comparison to most of our meat products and seafood products. Okay, so that's something to really think about when it comes to your reflection on all of this and your idea of how you want to eat in the future and now. Okay, the next question I'm going to ask is a poll as well. It's a bit of a whirlwind this because I realize we're running late on time. So the next poll I want to find out is about food waste. We're going to move on to that quite quick. How much meat do you think is wasted every year? Okay, that's the poll that should be popping up on your screen. As a percentage, how much meat do you think is wasted every year? Bearing in mind, if we're looking at the graph as well, meat is the most carbon intensive product. So it's almost crazy to think that we would waste any of it. But how much do we think? We seem to have a one-way tie as well for first place. Everyone's saying 20%. We've got a 10% in there. Okay, 90%. Okay. That's great. Well done. And again, I'm not going to tell you the answer just yet because I would also like to know how much fruit and vegetables do you think are wasted every year? So that's another poll that's going to come up on your screen. Again, fruit and veg, it's very low carbon intensive when you compare it to meat and seafood products. But how much do you think we waste every year? Globally, that is, not just the UK. This is globally. This one's a bit more tricky. Seems to be, I think more people are thinking about this one. We've got 60% in the lead so far. Oh no. Oh no, we've got 45%. Oh. It's always so interesting to see it from this side of the camera. Okay, well, I feel like I'm already teaching people who know everything because you're both absolutely right. So you're right, it's about 20% of all meat and poultry that is wasted every year and about 45% of all fruit and veg that is wasted every year. And we've got some other stats on here. I'm not going to go into too much detail because you can see it on your screen, but it's quite a frightening statistic when you see how much food is wasted every year. And it's not just the actual waste, but it's the cost. And then we've got then the secondary consequences of this as well. From wasting all this food, it's exactly like Maya was talking about in the beginning. If all this stuff just goes to landfill, then we have a serious problem. You know, this is where a lot of that 26% of food, 26% of global greenhouse gases is coming from. Hopefully this graphic should illustrate it a bit better. But not only are we just wasting food, which is a primary problem, but we've got secondary problems with that as well. Not just the greenhouse gas emissions, but we've also got, when we saw that big green part on the graph, the land use change, that's usually changing forests or peatlands or bogs or something into land that can be used for cattle or whatever sort of animals to graze on. But that then loses biodiversity. You're taking away trees that can suck carbon out of the atmosphere, and it increases these climate change events, or the likelihood of them. But not even to mention that, but it's the actual monetary cost. So that food that we waste equates to about 800 million people going hungry every year, and that's the same as about $1 trillion in costs. So think about everything you see on the news now about everybody going hungry and everybody on food stamps and things like that. But we're wasting so much food right now when there's absolutely no reason to be, and it's quite criminal when you think about it. Just from food waste alone, that's 10%. So that's close to half of all greenhouse gas emissions for food production and transportation. Almost half of that is just on food waste. So if we stopped wasting our food, we could cut our greenhouse gas emissions significantly from this. So that's something to really think about. It's unnecessary and it's hugely expensive. Right, no more preaching from me. Let's have a look at what some schools are doing around the country. So what I would suggest, which I think is a really good thing to do when it comes to food waste, if this is something you want to tackle in your house or in your school, do a food waste survey. Go and find out what type of food waste you have, how much of it you have, and where and when do you produce it is a good thing to find out, and record and review this often. Okay, these are great things to do because you don't know how to treat your food waste until you know what kind of food waste you have and how much of it you have. So that would be the first thing I'd do if this was something you were going to tackle. Some other ideas that schools have shared with us, which we thought were great. In the picture, you can see smaller plates. Sometimes we've seen, whether it's high schools or primary schools, you know, I'm pretty sure an S6 can eat more than an S1, and I'm pretty sure a P7 can eat more than a P1, especially in the times that we're given. So that's an idea. A really popular one is meat-free Mondays. I'm not coming on to here and telling you to be a vegan for the rest of your life, because that would be wrong to suggest that. But meat-free Mondays, reducing the amount of meat we have will have a huge impact. So that's been something you can try, and it's always worked quite well in schools, I think, as well. Or at least have the option to go meat-free in your cafeterias and things like that. That would always be nice. One of the things I thought was excellent was eating your snack before break time. That means you're not rushing and playing or playing football or talking to your friends or doing whatever you want, and not eating and then rushing it really quickly and then just throwing it in the bin when the bell's gone. But working with the council and the cafeteria to decide on the type of menu you have and what you can do with your food waste as well is a key one. Composting is a really popular one. You know, if you have school grounds and you can make compost you know, if you have fruit or veg plants, if you just have a flower bed, this compost is going to benefit that massively. And it's very easy now to make different types of compost. And there's lots of products on the market and things like that. But what I think is great, and I'm almost preaching to the choir here, is incorporating all of this into school life. And that's sort of what we're doing now. You're in class, you're in your classroom, and you're learning about this stuff, and that's incorporating it into your school life. So that's fantastic. But it's your job now as an eco committee or somebody who takes an interest in it, at least, to spread that out to the rest of the school or to your family or to your friends and things like that. The very final thing, the last slide, this is the slide I had at the very beginning, but now I've just filled it in with with things from that I've spoken about for my last 20 minutes, all about food waste and food production and things like that. I'm not going to go over it, but this, hopefully over the course of this hour or hour and 10, you've been given a lot of ideas and a lot of food for thought for what you can do going forward. And hopefully there is something in there for everyone to do. Like I said, it doesn't have to be as a group, even though we massively encourage it. It could be something you start off doing as an individual and work your way up to a group. Anything is better than nothing, and that's what we always sort of like to promote. So thank you very much for joining us today. I'm sorry I've kept you going for past the allotted time by 10 minutes. But again, thank you very much. We really appreciate you coming here, and we hope you've taken something from it and you can progress forward with your sustainable future. Thank you very much.